Hi, welcome to this week's episode. Today we're talking about the sandwich generation. What the heck does that mean? Let's dive right in.
The Retirement Readiness Podcast with Tim Regan and Katie Umland. Presented by Prairie View Wealth and Tax Advisors. Live your 2-comma life.
So we're...
likes me some sandwiches.
yeah, man, I guess that was kind of misleading. That is exciting.
Yes.
Well, we're definitely the sandwich generation.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Yeah. All of a sudden I got nothing but like a combination. Beef and sausage. And
I'm an Italian combo girl.
Yeah,
oh man, can't go wrong with
So
Italian.
Is that the kind of sandwich you meant,
I wish.
Katie?
No. So we are going to talk about how there's kind of this, it's been I guess it's a generation. So it's been years now of you're in your mid 40s, 50s, you're caring for your own children, but you're also caring for your parents.
Yep.
And so you're kind of in the sandwich of you have a lot of people to care for and
a lot of,
in a lot of different ways.
And how do you separate those things, right? Like, how do you say my mom and dad or dad needs me and my kids need me, but yet I need my own money, right? And I need my own time, and I need, all of those things.
And who comes first? And
exactly. Yeah.
And when it's the same, how do you?
Yeah. And then how does that look when it's my spouse's parents and not my parents?
Sure.
And, all of a sudden, like, well, they should have planned better themselves. And why do I have to?
And like, maybe they have their own money, but you're still caring for them. Like maybe money isn't even the sole issue. It could be, but it could just also be your time. Yeah.
Well, and we see that so frequently. There have been times where we'll have a couple that retires, and I think about I won't use any names, but I think about mom's neighbor behind her when she was in Piatone.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was thinking of also.
And her son ends up ultimately retiring, but isn't truly free to be retired because there's always in the back of your mind, I need to take care of mom, right? And maybe I'm retired to Tennessee, but I can't because I have to be there for mom. And
he retired. He had his own health issues, so it wound up being his wife caring for him and his mom. Yeah. His mom lived to be 103 or
plus,
4.
Yeah.
And so it was like 20 plus years of retired with your own health issues and caring for your mom, and that's crazy.
It's a big deal.
And also, like, the other major thing that enters my mind with that is like how much guilt your parent probably feels.
Oh, for sure.
Like they feel like such a burden. My kids shouldn't have to be caring for me for this long. Yeah. I should be dead by now.
Yeah. It's, we always laugh. Sarah's great grandmother lived to 105. And there was one time when we were talking with her, and she like made this comment about all of her friends being gone. And we thought she was getting sad, and she was like joking around with us. She was like, I wonder if they think I didn't make it that way. Right?
She should have been here a long time ago.
Where is Frida?
So true.
Yeah. And so when you think about that, those are things that you can't really all the way plan for, but you kind of somewhat can. And so what we like to do is to really talk about being intentional. And it's the same. We have almost the same conversation with parents before kids get ready to go off to college. And not, I should say, before they choose a college. If you're not intentional about what the plan is going in, you can end up in a really bad place that you didn't intend because you let those options come into play. So I'll give you an example. If I don't, before I let my kids start looking at schools, if I don't put together a parameter around geography that I want them to go to school in, or if I don't put somewhat of a budget together for where I want them to spend, all of a sudden they might choose to go, 3,000 miles away
on Arizona State or SoCal.
That's right. And all of a sudden, and you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And now you're breaking a dream, which should have never even been an option. They would have been just as happy with something else. And it's similar when you start thinking about this situation. As parents age, we all know what's going to happen. We all know kind of how that looks. It's better to have that conversation 10 years before and start seeing what's good for each spouse. And for that spouse to say, you know what, I really think I need to take care of my mom. And with the other spouses thinking we're selling the house and we're moving to Florida,
right?
That's a whole different deal.
Or you think mom's going to live with us so she can help take care of my kids too. Like there's so many different things that you could think.
Well, and even to that with kids, right? So I think that this is one of the bigger areas, even more so than parents. We see couples having issues where a kid is going to boomerang, right? Maybe they were out of the house, went off to college, maybe had a job, but they're back now in the basement, or they're not. They're married, but they're not making enough money to do what mom and dad think they should do, or they're just mismanaging their money.
Right.
And you have one parent or one spouse that says, we're helping Johnny as much as we can, and they're bleeding money for Johnny. And the other spouse is saying, wait a minute, we got to pay for us. And so it's both of those. It's like you talked about, it's that sandwich part of it.
Well, and I also think it's funny, like this generation has kind of, it's been around for a while. I think about like mom, she was a sandwich also. She was caring for me and caring for her mom. And I grew up caring for grandma. Yep. Like that was our routine. Like,
and historically, that was always the thing. Before people were mobile, like that, you had multiple generations
living together.
That lived together. So you really never had nursing homes because you always had the next generation that was taking care of the older generation and so on.
Which maybe it's even harder now because they don't live under the same roof. Like before, if it was like assumed grandma lives with us. It kind of goes back to that whole college thing, right? Because now my retirement can look so much different than it did just 50 or 60 years ago. If you think about rewinding the clock back, air travel was not what it was or what it is today. Like it used to be, I retired, I went on one cruise. Like everybody dreamed of going to Hawaii for their 35th wedding anniversary, and that was their big trip type of thing. And now people take that trip multiple times throughout their life, and are traveling all the time. And so I think what really has changed is it's the options for how we live our lives has changed more so than the model of the younger generation taking care of the older and being kind of stuck in that sandwich. I think it's the same thing, that it just has changed where previously, everybody lived under the same roof. The generation took care of the next one. But now it's like, for me, mom and I always kind of joke that Quinny is going to be the one to take care of me and mom. But that's what me and mom are used to. So for us, that's
normal.
Is normal and makes sense.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's what makes sense to me too.
Well,
so,
and you're fortunate in that you have a spouse who is very open to you and mom being as close as you and mom are, and whatever, like Alex would adjust where you guys live to be close to mom. Right.
And has.
And so, but that's not always the case. Right. And so it's, how do you balance all of those things, and start making some decisions that are good for your family? And I think about, even as you go down that list. So your conversation with mom and mine's a little bit different.
It's so different.
I told mom,
here's the key to your home.
I told her that we had to move her close enough to a nursing home so that when the time came, I could just push her in the wheelchair down the street and just say, here you go. Right. Jokingly, of course. But as you think about that, it's really not fair to make assumptions for anybody, right? And so you and mom having that conversation is healthy. But there are other times when we have them in the office, and though the kids are stressing about what are we going to do with mom and dad, but they've never talked to mom and dad.
Yeah.
And sometimes that conversation with mom and dad can clear things up in a big way, and take some of that burden off of them.
Well, I guess maybe you can talk a little bit about this, because it is like mom and dad are the ones making their choices with long-term care insurance, or however they're planning for that option. And it does impact their kids, but their kids aren't necessarily
the kids
in the room with them while they make those choices.
No, absolutely. And that's what happens. And so ultimately what happens is we have parents that maybe make really poor choices throughout their lives. They don't really invest their money. They don't save. They don't do things like long-term care insurance, and all of a sudden they leave their kids stuck picking up the pieces. And so we've even had cases where it was enough of a concern with the kids, that they bought long-term care insurance for mom and dad. Okay. Like the kids came together and said, we recognize that mom and dad aren't going to be able to afford the insurance, let alone if they need care. we are all living in places that aren't real close to them. And so we've actually had kids step in and do that because ultimately that becomes their problem.
Yeah.
And so it's like you should kind of think about that as well, not only with your parents, but also with your own children. When you start looking at that sandwich, like, do you really like, I love a beef sandwich. Do I really want to be the beef? Right. Like, and so, but as you think about that stuff, it's being proactive and having conversations that might seem like difficult conversations, but mapping it out, because I can assure you having that conversation, as difficult as it might be, is way easier than being left with consequences that you were not
even if starting with your own spouse is probably helpful. Like, what do you assume is going to happen here?
Yeah. Well,
and what are you okay with?
Absolutely. And really having both spouses, then sometimes it's helpful. Do it with somebody else. Like, come in and talk to your financial advisor about it. Like, let them be somebody that can offer some different perspective. Because sometimes spouses can get at an impasse where one thinks this, the other thinks this, and they don't
realize there's a third option, or correct. There's a different way to
look at this problem. Yeah. And especially like you feel for, I think about you and Alex, because you and Alex are going to be more sandwiched than Sarah and I, right? Because our kids are already
our ages.
Yeah, our kids are already almost out of the house, and mom is still very young, active, healthy. Like, there's no way that I'm going to be a sandwich.
I will not be a sandwich.
No, I will eat it. But for you and Alex, that's a very real possibility. And because, as you look forward, just your relationships are different to where that could be. And so for you two to sit down and say, how do we want to approach this, and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, goes a long way, having that conversation now than when you have to make that
It's
decision.
Also a lot like estate planning. Like, there's so many variables and so many what ifs. Like, okay, what if mom dies before Al? What if Al dies before mom?
Yes.
And also, our grandma lived to be 98.
Yep.
Alex's grandma just celebrated her 100th birthday. So we could be sandwiched on both sides.
Yeah.
And then it's okay.
That's like a club sandwich.
That's like, we need a lot of toothpicks. But there's so many variables. I mean, there's 2 sets of parents, 4 parents,
yeah,
a lot of things to consider.
100%. Well, and I think that's really where, so when we talk about what's acceptable, what's not, because there are so many variables to this thing, you can't plan for every single one, but you can put together like an outline of what do we think would be okay. So for example, if one of our parents needs care, needs help on a daily basis, but it's not really nursing stuff, it's more like dressing and feeding and that kind of stuff, are we okay having them come into our house with us? Some spouses will say yes, and some may say no, but let's work that out today so that it's not something that when the time comes and now everybody's emotions are high and you're feeling like
I thought we were okay with that. Yeah. I was kind of in the back of my head, thought that was going to happen.
Yeah. And so then once you get there, let's say you and Alex are like, yeah, totally. Something happens. Our parents can come live with us. You now have that on your mind and you're like working that into your plans. You may not realize it, but it's working into your plans. Have you talked to your parent about it?
Right.
What if you went to your parent and said, hey, no,
I want my own space.
I already thought that through and this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's just being really intentional about it. And so then when you talk about the sandwich part, so we talked about one part of it, we talked about the upper end. Let's really talk about the kids a little bit, because we see a lot of angst and tension inside of families when it comes to kids that are either, it really falls into a couple of different categories. One, those kids who really just are not being successful enough to be self-sufficient. And how are parents going to deal with that? We also then have on the another part of that where you have parents that are being self-sufficient, but they have kids that are going to daycare and mom or dad, the grandma or grandpa doesn't think that that's the right answer. And all of a sudden grandma and grandpa are being mom and dad because they're watching the kids 5 days a week. And so it comes in a couple different varieties, but it's the same thing where if you don't have people on the same page, you end up with a lot of headache and a lot of issues, and probably something hard for you to think about with a 1 and a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Right.
We're not there yet.
Yeah. But it's a very real thing. And we see it all the time where, I'll use our house. This isn't true. We don't have any right now we don't have any kids boomeranging. Knock on wood, that'll never be the case. But if it were, like, I could see Sarah saying, hey, we really need to help them out, or me saying that, and the other one being like, no, this is the time of tough love. They got to figure it out. And so just having some of those conversations as well.
It's always so hard when it's like, you don't know what's going to happen. So it's like, yeah, we can have these conversations, but until you're in the moment and you say,
well, and so let's talk about that. So when you're in the moment, then, right, you're now faced with that decision. The thing that I encourage people to go back to when it's a money type of a decision, are we going to help the kids in this area or not? Recognize that every dollar can only be spent once. So think about, let's say that you have a child that needs to have, behind on their mortgage, needs a mortgage payment. Well, the mortgage payment that you help them make this month, you do not have those dollars to help your grandchild when they need a surgery, or you don't have that money to go on a trip to wherever. You, like, the dollar can only be spent once. And so what can seem, when you're in that situation, what can seem like a no-brainer, well, they need the money, so of course we're going to give it to them. I have the money. Yes, and that's true, but recognize that means that that's money that you cannot fill in whatever blank you want to fill in. What happens when your next child also can't make their mortgage payment?
Right.
That's money you can't help them with. If you've already helped one child by this much, how do you now say I can't help another child because I've already done that? So it really can come down to recognizing the either or, and then what are my priorities? Is it more important for me to help here? Or is it more important for me to have the retirement that I had dreamed about? More important for the grandkids to go to college? More important, just all of that
So
stuff.
Let's say that, like, your child is an adult, whether they're married or not, or whatever their situation is, and you do decide they need some help. Do you have, like, kind of some best practices or, like, best ways to do that? Is it, like, just write them a check? Is it give them a car? Is it? So
I think it probably all depends on the child and the situation. Things that we would suggest that are universal. If you make a gift once to a child or help a child once, it is a relief. It is thankfulness. It is all of the things that you would want it to be. When you do it twice, it becomes
expectation or a crutch.
By time three it is. Well, I don't have to change my behavior. I can just reach out to have them bail me out. And so just be intentional about that. If you want them to be able to count on every Christmas, mom gives me $5,000. The first year, they're going to do something special with it. It's going to be a special gift. By year 3, they have adjusted their entire lifestyle, counting on $5,000 coming from mom. So when you get into those situations, you have to start thinking about behavior management, which sounds really poor, but it's kind of is. What is the behavior I want out of my child? And is what I'm getting ready to do going to enhance that behavior? Or am I going to encourage them to continue down a path that isn't good?
I guess kind of like maybe a better way to phrase my question, or maybe a different route, is like, how do we swim upstream? Like, and help the problem rather than
100%
just dumping money in the
into the abyss.
Right. Like how do you get to the.
Yeah. And so I think you brought up a couple of good options. So for a child who's maybe unemployed, and it really is a short-term unemployment, they really have been pretty good. Then it's
a blip, a
true blip. Then monetarily writing checks, helping them to pay bills in the meantime is not a bad path. Many times we would suggest you put brackets around it where you start to say, I'm willing to help you with $10,000 or whatever that number is, or I'm willing to pay your mortgage for a month and a half, or whatever however you put a bracket around it so that everybody knows going into it what the expectation is. If it's a child that has chronic types of issues, then there's many times the right answer is no. And it's kind of like, I think about, we talked in the past about Sarah and I when we were first married, and we had like negative dollars. If we don't go through that,
you don't know how to go through that.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not as strong as a couple. We don't figure out how to figure it out, like all of those things. And so sometimes you can handicap your child when you think that you're actually helping them. You also mentioned, do I give them a car? I think that also goes to what is the real root of the problem. If a car is keeping them from getting the job, or then yes, you say, okay, well, I can do that. That's easier than just writing checks every month to finance their bills. And so it really does go to what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then how do we make sure that it solves the problem, and not having guilt around, well, we have some money, we should help them. No, what are you trying to solve? And how can we solve that?
This is related, but maybe a little different. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the idea of, normally you would kind of see this with a boomerang, or if after high school, your kids they don't go to college, let's say they are still living with you, and you start charging them rent.
Yeah. Love it.
But then maybe either A, you just straight charge them rent, or B, you charge them rent, you're secretly saving it to give them back to be a down payment. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it goes directly to your child. I think every child, when they get their job, it's no different than when you taught them how to ride a bike. You didn't give them a mini bike with a motor on it and say, go have at it. You started with training wheels, and then you took the training wheels off, and then you maybe got them a BMX bike, and then a 10-speed or whatever, right? You help them to graduate, and then ultimately they end up driving a car and that kind of stuff. It's the same thing. If your child is in the process of trying to become independent, which is what your ultimate goal is, start taking the training wheels off a little bit at a time. You don't have to, so let's say that they're back at home and they're working. Like, this isn't they're going to school and they're just back home for the summer, but like, they're either through school, or I'm not doing school anymore and I'm going to go into the trades or do something else. It should absolutely be, step one is, what are the bills that you haven't been paying for that are your bills that we can start converting over? You should start paying for your cell phone. You should start covering your car insurance. Those types of things. Maybe I help you get your Target card and you start paying for all of your own sundries and that kind of stuff. As that progresses and you just layer that in, then probably 6 months in, you start having the conversation around, hey, let's talk about what it looks like for rent to live here. You have to charge them fair market value, but what does that look like? I'm a big proponent that if the kids are doing the right thing, that should not be punitive to them, right? So you're just helping them to establish the practice, if you will. So if they're doing the right stuff, go ahead and save it for them. Give it to them as a down payment later on and be like, here, this was not our intention to profit from you being at home. But on the flip side, if they start working full time and never start paying rent,
they're 0 to 100.
Well, and how could they ever then buy a house or think about coming up with $1,500 a month in rent? Yeah. Because they got used to spending all of their income. It's kind of like Dad used to say, as your income expands and your lifestyle expands, you don't just expand in one area. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden you're buying the hefty bags instead of the cheap Walmart brand, or the fancy paper plates instead of the cheap ones. And like, every area of your life expands. And so then to say, well, I'm going to go and find this money and just scale back, you can't, because you got to cut everything. And that will happen to your child if they're living at home and you're not putting in some of those parameters for them. Their lifestyle is going to expand to spend all of that money, and then they'll never be able to find it to do the things that they really want to do.
So maybe like when your parents are old, you can start charging them rent and like.
Well, I charge them rent now. They don't live at my house. But
there's got to be some reason they owe you rent.
Yes, somewhere has to happen. And be realistic too, right? Like, I think we're fortunate enough that Mom and Al are in a solid financial position, so nobody in the family is worried about, will we have to financially support them? But not every family is that way. And so if you have one side of the family that is not in that place, have the conversation with your spouse. What happens if my mom and dad can't afford to have somebody come into their home and live with them? How do we want to address that? Will we let them come into our house? Will we be okay with just saying, no, you're on your own, you made your bed, sleep in it? Are we going to feel like we have to pay that? Like, address it and have the conversation. And the same thing with Johnny. where we see the biggest risks or the biggest issues are when spouses don't have open and honest conversations. And all of a sudden grandma is babysitting the kids 4 days a week. And grandpa is like, that's
I'm
great.
supposed to be retired.
We're supposed to be traveling too, and we can't even travel. Or grandma or grandpa's okay with the family living in their house. It's supposed to be a 2-month deal while they're in between places that turns into 3 years, and nobody's got the guts to say, anything. Hey, it's time, type of stuff. So.
Well, and I think like, even if you think you're on the same page, still having the conversation has to be helpful, because I know this comes up with Alex and I all the time. I have something in my head that I don't even realize I have in my head as like some sort of baseline, like, obviously.
Yeah. Duh.
And then like, it'll come up and he's like, wait, how did you get there? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize like
you weren't there
with me, or like I didn't even realize that was an expectation in my own head. That I just was like kind of operating under this assumption.
Yeah, no, 100%.
And so you kind of like having a conversation that brings it up in your own head of, oh, what did I even have as an assumption? Like I didn't realize that I had some kind of assumption.
And even those assumptions, like question those assumptions too for yourself, because like, so you talk about, if we look at that sandwich generation, you have to, how do I make the decision going into it? So give you an example. We talked about the dollar only gets spent once. So every dollar I take away from and spend here, I cannot spend anywhere else. So then that starts to force me into some priorities. Would I rather spend that dollar on travel, or would I rather spend that dollar helping mom and dad? Would I rather, like, just all those things? But when you're in the place that you and Alex may be in, where you start saying, okay, mom may need somewhere to live, but also Quinn is just starting out in her life as well. What happens if we're all in the same house?
Right.
If I move mom in, does that preclude me from allowing Quinn to move in? Which one would be more important? Which one do I have a bigger responsibility to? And so that's where those are hard decisions. They're really tough. But if you're not intentional, you could all of a sudden without having that forethought, you could say, oh yeah, of course, mom, you need a place to stay. Come in and move in with us. Not thinking that in a year and a half or 2 years, Quinn may be in the same spot. And you're like, oh
the bedroom's filled.
A minute. Yeah. How would I do that?
And also like, you might have an assumption, like I was saying, that I'm used to caring for grandma. So, we kind of just naturally assume Quinny and I will also be taking care of mom. But just because that's what you're used to, or your assumption, doesn't mean you would be okay with that.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
You could also question to yourself, like, okay, wait, like just because that's what we did, is that
really
what I want?
Yeah, exactly.
Or, like until you actually start thinking of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so hilarious that it's you and Quinn. Quinn is a year old.
Yeah.
So, but yet you will have 3 other children.
I know.
Correct?
But they're all boys.
And that was my point.
Yeah.
Right?
All the boys are doing the wheelchair to the nursing home. I know how it goes.
Yeah. It's so funny. I think we've talked about it before, but we definitely have what we call pink jobs and blue jobs in the Regan household, in our house at least. And what we're finding is Madeline, our second, was the one that is really, her and Grace are the two that really probably promote that thought process more than anybody else. And what we're finding with Maddie, now that she's got a pretty serious boyfriend, is that really blue jobs are anything that the pink doesn't want to do. Right? It is not like he's doing all kinds of things. So Tim said the other day, Matthew does a lot of stuff. He's really handy. And so he's fixed quite a bit of stuff for Maddie. And Tim said the other day, is like, if he's going to keep this up, Maddie's better find some pink stuff she can start doing, because
pink list is pretty short.
Yeah. But it's funny because, and I make light of it, but to you right away today, all of a sudden we're doing those same assumptions, right? Assuming that it was going to be you and Quinn.
Or that Quinn even wants to do that.
Any of that, right?
And I'm not going to put that on her.
Oh, no, of course.
I'm not going to.
But it's like, you never thought
Dylan, right?
You never thought that.
Yeah.
And so even though I've often thought, like, if something ever happened to mom, should you and Alex not be in the area or whatever, like, I could very easily see, like, mom moving in with us. I joke with her about pushing her to the nursing home, but I could see her moving in. But even in that scenario, I see Sarah being the one that's probably spending a lot of the caregiving time with mom, And so it's like, that's an assumption.
That's a pink job too.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm saying, so those are the assumptions that I made, right?
Yeah.
But have I talked to Sarah about that?
Right.
No.
Or mom.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
Yeah. It's that, and that goes along with like, you don't even realize that you're making that assumption.
Yep.
It's just like playing in the background.
Yeah, exactly. So did we solve any problems today?
I don't think so.
The only thing I think is my suggestion is the decision-making framework, right? Like when you're thinking about these things, first, if you can have a conversation beforehand, have it with all parties involved.
I was going to say with your parents, with your spouse,
with you, all of them.
I'll go home and tell Quinny today. She's taking care of me and grandma.
Yes, it's time.
Quinny,
time for us to have a very serious conversation.
We need to start flipping this, girl. You're a year and a half.
That's right. Let's get it done. And so have the conversations, be intentional. But then when the time comes to make the decision, start making decisions not in a vacuum. Realize that the decisions that you're making are going to affect almost every other area of your life. And so it's very easy to get kind of tunnel vision and focusing just on the problem at hand. The kids don't have money for the mortgage payment. Let's help them out. Take a pause, pump the brakes for 1 second. Think about all of the things that means for you before you make that decision. And then put into priority level what's important for us to spend our money on, what's important for us to spend our time on. Anything that we're doing over here is going to mean it's time and money. We cannot do that somewhere else. And so, just kind of be intentional with what that looks like.
So start now, I guess.
Yeah.
Like
fun. Yay.
Start with your parents and your.
I'm kind of happy that we kind of this episode solved a lot of issues for me. Like we talked about some ways to make decisions. I've learned that I don't have to worry about Mom and Al.
Yeah. It's checked off.
That's checked off my list.
Yeah. I don't either. Quinny.
Yeah.
We all have Quinny.
Done. We're done.
So, she's got a lot of weight on her shoulders as a year and a half year old.
Yeah, she does. Speaking of the kids, what are they up to? So you guys went preschool exploring?
Yes, we did. Dill will go to preschool a couple days a week in the fall. So now I just have to, I was like, oh, good. Like, we're having twins in end of June. So I thought, okay, that gives him 2 months and then he'll go to school. That'll kind of help alleviate some of the chaos at home. He'll go to school. And then I'm like, I have to get 4 kids in the car to drop him off 2 blocks away for 2 hours, come back home, load them back, 4 kids back up in the car.
Can I add like what I picture happening? I picture you loading them all up, driving them 2 blocks, you sitting in the car, feeding the twins.
Exactly.
While Quinn is either
doing who knows
something
what in the car.
Hopefully there's a park that you can park at and be like, I can keep an eye on Quinn and I can it's going to be chaos.
And it's just going to be come home, feed the twins and
turn around and
go back and pick them up. So it's maybe not working out exactly how
it might be a vacation for Dill.
I thought.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, all
awesome.
good things.
All good things.
You just had some of your kids surprise your beautiful wife for her birthday.
Yes, we did.
Timmy surprised her, and Lily came into town.
Yeah.
Maddie's a little too far for a day trip.
Maddie wanted to really bad, but it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, right? Not for a day trip or even 2 days, whatever.
And part of it was we're like, all right, we're going to spend one day on Friday shuttling back and forth to the airport.
Exactly.
You're going to spend one day on Sunday shuttling back and forth to the airport. Just didn't make sense. But had a wonderful birthday
and Super Bowl weekend. I didn't realize until this year that Sarah's birthday is so close to the Super Bowl. Well, obviously, it's not always.
I think this is the first year that it actually fell on the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah. Well, it actually was the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
I was thinking her birthday was Saturday.
And so it's like I think it's the first year it ever actually fell on, which, I mean, yay, Super Bowl.
Yeah, I was going to say she doesn't care.
But yeah, it was a great time for us to have everybody home.
Good.
So
thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Retirement Readiness Podcast. For more resources, head to pv-wp.com. Be well.
The Retirement Readiness Podcast with Tim Regan and Katie Umland. Presented by Prairie View Wealth and Tax Advisors. Live your 2-comma life. Learn more at pv-wp.com. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to the Retirement Readiness Podcast on your preferred podcast platform.